Hello and welcome to the first edition of Resident Advisors Exchange, a new series of podcasts that we'll be doing on a weekly basis where we talk to the artists, labels, and promoters that are shaping the electronic music landscape. My name is Todd L. Burns and I'm the editor-in-chief of Resident Advisor. I'm pleased to bring you this first RA Exchange with the New York Techno veteran Dave Sumner, aka Function. Over the past few years, Sumner has found fame in underground techno circles as part of the Sandwell District collective, alongside Regis and Silent Servant. But as our lengthy chat reveals, his roots go far deeper than the recent exploits of the shadowy collective. He's been around since the early 90s, promoting, DJing, and producing techno, and even a little bit of house on occasion. I caught up with Dave at his Berlin apartment in September to talk about the New York scene, playing at Sonar's massive main stage as part of Sandwell District, and much more. Did you grow up in New York?
Yes.
You were born there?
I was born in Brooklyn and raised in Brooklyn, Staten Island, and New Jersey. I always kind of wished I grew up my whole life in New York, but I'm glad.
So there was a stigma when you went to New Jersey?
Yeah, I mean that is the ultimate stigma in the New York area. There's this.
When did you move to New Jersey? Was it like as a teenager?
7th grade, yeah, when I was 13.
A very impressionable time, of course.
Yeah, well, it was a weird one because at that point, there were a lot of families moving out to the suburbs. For a lot of the same reasons my parents moved us out there. My dad grew up on the streets of Brooklyn, and you know, it was tough. You had to be tough, and he had 3 brothers, and you know, they grew up on the streets of New York, and
so it was kind of almost a status thing to move to New Jersey in a way. It was like we're moving on up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's
of course, from your perspective, in a way, it was like, well, moving to Jersey.
Yeah, and you know, it's like one of these things where, you know, everybody in New York, they're so, especially Brooklyn. Like, I think of all the boroughs, I think people from Brooklyn are the most proud. You know, you growing up, like you'd always see an Italian American guy with like a tattoo on his shoulder that just said Brooklyn. You never saw that for Queens or Manhattan or Staten Island, you know, or the Bronx. But so you know, and then they're so proud that then they would always make fun of suburban kids. You know, like, you know, you're from Jersey. You know, it was like.
Were you going?
You always hear about me saying that I'm from New York and born in Brooklyn. You never really hear me talk about how I'm from New Jersey, you know, because it's like, and you know, I finished middle school, went to high school and college out there in New Jersey, and as soon as I was able to, I moved right back to Manhattan because it's Jersey, it's the suburbs, you know. It's like,
when you moved back to Manhattan, did you have a job or anything, or was it simply I have to get back to Manhattan, I don't care how?
No, I found a job first, and it's still one of the most memorable times of my life, and a lot of the things that I'm doing now stemmed from that situation. I used to work at a music store named Rogue Music. It was on 30th Street between 7th and 8th Avenues, and it wasn't a storefront. It was like kind of like a vintage analog synthesizer shop that was almost by appointment only, but not appointment only, but it was on the 10th floor, so it was the type of thing that you had to know about, you know, and it had a cult following, and it was also right around the corner from Madison Square Garden, so our clients were always just like, you know, I was selling the studio to like Old Dirty Bastard and the Beastie Boys, and like, you know, I was constantly, you know, and at that shop I worked with Dennis Ferrer, who basically got me my first record deal because he had started Synewave with Damon Wild, and I knew Damon from the early days at Limelight, from DJing and stuff like that, and I was always playing stuff on Experimental and the early Synewave stuff, and Dennis was really good friends with Damon, so Damon would come in to hang out with Dennis or buy stuff, and then I became better friends with him. And the thing was is that I wound up getting an apartment on the 15th floor above Rogue Music, so I had this, I mean, this was 96, so rent was a lot cheaper, you got a lot more space in Manhattan. So my old roommate and I had half a floor on the 15th floor, overlooking Madison Square Garden and the Empire State Building, and the whole front of the apartment was just windows, and it was just magic. It basically, it's the thing that happened in my life that helped set everything else up. It put my mind in that state to...
Before you got the job in Rogue Music, you said you were DJing at Limelight and already into electronic music. I mean, do you remember the moment or the track or the DJ or the party that you went to that sort of was the jumping off point, the first?
Yeah, I mean, 1991 at Limelight is still what happened there is it's the high that I will forever chase.
Enjoy it.
What happened during that era, I've yet to come across anything that can hold a candle to it. And one of the reasons why I'm living in Berlin is because I came over. I had been to Berlin before, played in Berlin before, but before I decided to move here, I came over for 2 weeks, and just to see if it was right. And in that 2-week period, I was staying with Regis, and we had a couple of studio sessions that wound up becoming some of the strongest Sandwell District releases, and helped bring Sandwell District to the point where it is now. And then while I was over during that period, I went to Berghain for the first time, and walking into Berghain for the first time is the only situation since walking into Limelight the first time that gave me that feeling again. And
what was the music that was being played there in 1991?
In 91, it was, there was the whole Disco 2000 thing on Wednesdays, and that was Michael Alec and the Club Kids, and that whole scene.
And that's the movie and book, Party Monster,
and that whole thing, which I'm very happy to say I had front row seats to that whole situation. I was friends with all those people. And it's kind of funny to see movies be made about something that you experienced firsthand, like Kids and Party Monster. I remember when I'd go to NASA, another party that was more of like a teen kind of rave party that was at Shelter, that was by DB and Scotto. And I remember the first time I ever saw Chloe Sevigny. She was working the coat check there. And I just remember looking across the room and being like, who is that girl? She's so beautiful. And then she was in Kids, and then Boys Don't Cry and won an Oscar, It's like, so there's a lot of cool things that happened during that period, which inspired me to make a life out of it,
Was it the parties? Was it the music? Was it something else?
It was definitely the music, but also That was the end of an era of New York that doesn't exist anymore. And even though it seemed fresh and new to me, it was actually the very tail end of the death of downtown. If Andy Warhol would have still been alive, he would have been there as well, and all that whole cast of characters from the factory and the whole Warhol scene was part of that. And later on, I started promoting events in New York based on trying to recreate what I experienced when I was a kid, because after a while, when the shit hit the fan, it was the kind of thing that what was going on there. I was 17, 18 years old, and I'd look around, I'd be like, how is this happening? This is not going to end easily. This is going to end in tears.
Did it feel like a losing battle when you were sort of trying to recreate?
Absolutely, because at the time that I was starting to do that, everything was moving out of clubs, and in the 80s, in late 70s, throughout the 80s, and into the early mid 90s, everything happened in really big clubs in New York. It was not out of the ordinary to go to a club and see Madonna dancing on the dance floor. When I was 17 or 18 years old, I was friends with this Hispanic kid, and it was during the time that Madonna had done that video with I forget the name of the video, but she was always in the press, like she was really into Latin American guys, and she was known for, she even said in books, like how her and her background singers would drive around in a limousine and pick up like Hispanic men, and just and so I was friends with this one kid who was Hispanic, and we were on the dance floor and Madonna just started making out with him. It's like, it's priceless. You can't. So obviously I wanted to, once that got lost, I wanted to see that side of New York again. And I don't know, it's never going to happen again, because that was an original time that you can never try to recreate something.
When did you first DJ though, or like Limelight? And I mean, when did you make the jump from crowd audience member to? I
mean, like I was saying before, the first time I walked into that club, I was sold. I was like, I'm gonna work here, I'm gonna play here, and my life is gonna be based around this. I'm in it for life. what they did with that club at that time was incredible. It was every week you'd go there and the decor would be different. There was, there was the main dance floor and the main area, and then in the back there were this kind of like labyrinth of rooms. The one main room was called the shampoo room, and then in back of that there was like a stairwell that went upstairs, and then what they basically moved the walls around. So every week you'd go, there would be,
it felt like a new club,
new art direction, and the art director that they had there at the time was absolutely brilliant. And what he would do, it was mind blowing. And as a kid, just coming from New Jersey, and I had been DJing at clubs in New Jersey during college and stuff like that. And even after I started playing at Limelight, I would still play in New Jersey, but it was just like cheesy in comparison, It's like, but Limelight was the thing that made me realize that I wanted to live in Manhattan and I wanted to play in clubs in Manhattan. And I became friends with some promoters there, and they checked me out as a DJ, and they decided that they wanted me to be their DJ. So when they would start promoting, they started out promoting for the club, but then they started getting their own nights, and I was their resident DJ. And so I was 18 years old when I first started playing there. I had a residency there, but it was on the main floor, but it was on Thursday nights. And Thursday nights were the slower night. Wednesdays was Disco 2000. Thursdays the party was always changing because it was never really super busy. And then Fridays was Future Shock, and with Jeff Mills and Repeat as the residents. And that is my connection to Limelight. I thought Disco 2000 was cool because there were freaks. It was really colorful. It's a scene that I have yet to see anything that could come close to that, because it was out there. It was like Michael Alec was at the helm and Hioki was the resident, but it was magic. But what I was really into was Future Shock Fridays. The promoter there was this guy Lord Michael, and he was really ahead of the curve on a lot of things. He in the nightclubs broke techno. At that time, Adam X and Frankie Bones and Heather Hart and Jimmy Crash and all of them, they had Groove Records in Brooklyn, and they started doing Storm Rave, and that they started the whole rave thing. But in the clubs, it was the best party in clubs was Future Shock Fridays.
You say that there's a big difference back then between raves and clubs. Were there completely different audiences going to these things? Like, would no one who went to a Storm Rave go to Limelight?
No, there was definitely a lot of bleed. But yeah, I'd say the Storm Rave parties were more kids from Brooklyn that were huge fans of Frankie Bones. Bones had his own thing, he was sort of like a cult figure, and he, even more so than Lord Michael with Future Shock at Limelight, Bones was responsible for guerrilla marketing techno. In Brooklyn, in Bensonhurst, which is like where Saturday Night Fever was set, like this very Italian-American macho area, and they in Bensonhurst there's this strip called 86th Street, which you can see in Saturday Night Fever. It's like an elevated train track with a street underneath it that it was just a strip. And on the weekends, there were just like these typical Italian Americans like in Cadillacs that are all, like really extravagant, wheels and decorations in the car, like stuff like that. And Frankie Bones and his friends and followers Frankie Bones was really big about doing mixtapes. And at this time, I guess probably 90, he had come over from playing a lot in the UK, and he was like Carl Regis and Pete Female, like they always knew about Frankie Bones when they were younger, because they'd go out to see the Stone Roses, and Frankie Bones was like opening, and he's playing for like 80,000 people. And at that time in 87, 88, 89, like Bones was really prolific and really massive and really big in the UK, and was getting received really well in the UK, and remixing like 808 State. And,
Were you immediately aware of, you were plugged into the scene in a certain sense, but were you immediately aware when he came back from the UK and he was this enormous thing? Did it seem like it was almost immediate back in the States that he was a big deal? Not that big of a deal, but at least a big deal.
Well, I started DJing when I was 15, I think it was 88 or 89, and some of the first records that I bought were Bones Breaks, so I was familiar with, and he was even doing big stuff with like Tommy Musto, like Musto and Bones, like Dangerous on the Dance Floor. These were like radio hits, and you could, at that time, you could turn on the radio any point in the day and hear Dangerous on the Dance Floor. It was getting major airplay. So I was already familiar with what he was doing, and then when he started doing the whole rave thing, it was like, so I was already familiar with his name, so it wasn't surprising, but
Were you more drawn to Mills and the club thing, or were you more drawn to the rave thing, or was it just you were drawn to both?
I was more of a Limelight kid than a Storm Rave kid. I loved Storm Rave. I loved the whole concept of, a dirty warehouse that smells like gasoline, but,
that could blow up in any moment.
During that time, some of the scale of their parties at that time, it was really mind-blowing, really impressive. And it was the first time I ever saw a stack of speakers that high and that long. So,
what was it about Jeff Mills that immediately?
I will always say Jeff Mills is my teacher. And the thing is that I remember specifically there was a time, and it was before I knew who Jeff Mills and Underground Resistance were. I had gone to Groove Records in Brooklyn, and I got a copy of the double pack, the Riot EP. The logo was just like a white label looked like a stamp, but it may have been manufactured, but it looked like a stamp, and it just had the UR logo on it. And then about a week later, I went to Limelight, and this is before I had started playing there. And at first I went on a Thursday night, and then I went again on a Friday, but I went on the Thursday night, and I walked in with my friend, and the club was completely empty. We got there early, but the club never really got full. this is a club that held 3,000 people. That night, maybe there was 150 people in the whole club. So it was completely dead, which is why it was so special to me, because I felt like I got a private performance. But I walked in the club, and all over the club on the walls are like photocopies of that logo that I had saw on the record. It's like, You Are. It's like, I have a record by You Are. And it still wasn't completely clear on what Underground Resistance was. Is it an artist? Is it a label? Is it, I wasn't sure. And then as we're standing there, then all of a sudden, we see them setting up a stage, and then all of a sudden a performance comes on, and it's Underground Resistance live. And it was set up like there was like the stage, and then behind it there was like a drum riser, so it was like leveled a bit, like, so it was on the drum riser in the back was Mad Mike on, like, with a lot of gear surrounding him, just like a huge setup of analog synthesizers and mixers and stuff. And then below that there was a setup with turntables, and there was Jeff Mills on turntables, and then the MC was Robert Hood, and at that time his name was Rob Noyes. So I think they came out and did The Punisher as their first track. And, he basically said, like, for those of you who know, for those of you who don't know, this is your punishment. Afterwards, I was like 17 or 18 years old. I was just like a punter, and because the club was so empty, like afterwards I was like standing on the stage, and Jeff Mills is like packing up his stuff, and I'm like asking him questions like, do you make all this stuff yourself? And yeah, he was really polite and totally nice, and
it's a good thing you didn't go up to Mike and ask him this.
Yeah, actually, my one friend, like I don't know, within a year, there was another friend of mine we were at Limelight, and he had an Underground Resistance jacket on, and Mad Mike walks up behind him and he's like, what you know about Underground Resistance? He was like, I don't know, I have every record. He was like, But it was cool because that was the first show, and then they did this, the same performance the following night at Future Shock, except Future Shock on Fridays, there was a line down the block and 3,000 people inside, 3,000 people. And just, the walls were sweating. It was ram-packed. So it was kind of cool to get to experience the same performance at one night at an empty club, and then see it,
And these were the types of things that I imagine, aside from just DJing, made you want to work in, like, this...
just an incredible high, just an incredible impact that just made me realize that nothing else got me that excited, and that I was destined to be a part of it,
Mm-hmm.
and
when did you start making music yourself? This was before you started working at Road?
Well, the thing is that, when I was finishing college and I was in New Jersey, I had, from the time at Limelight, I started to get these incredible urges to create my own stuff. And, it was the type of thing, there was no internet back then. And I didn't, because I was out in New Jersey and I wasn't surrounded by people that were in the industry or making music. So and you didn't have the internet, so I had to set out on my own. The thing was, when I was a kid, and I first started DJing in my parents' basement, and even before that, the one thing that always struck me about electronic music was that it sounded completely alien to me. I had some musical training when I was a kid, piano lessons and stuff like that. But you know, I always knew what the sound of a piano sounded like, and a drum set, and a saxophone, or a violin. I could place any of those sounds. And when I heard electronic music, you know, even as far back as like the Human League or Soft Cell, but then even later on with like Chicago Acid House, like the first time I ever heard the sound of the 303, I was like, what is that? I can't place that sound. I don't know what that is. And I then, you know, while I was in college and I'd be working on papers in the library, like I'd go and find books, you know, like I was really into obviously Kraftwerk, you know, when I was a kid. And, you know, Kraftwerk is the band that changed everything, because they were so, you know, focused on the cleanest production possible. It was like perfection. It's funny to me that everything that's happened with electronic music for the last 30 years, it still amazes me that no one sounds better than Kraftwerk, you know? Mm-hmm. Production-wise, like, you know, what they've done, they're scientists, basically. They've built a lot of their own gear and stuff like that. But it is amazing to me that no one has really stepped above them, like in terms of quality and production and stuff like that. But
how long were you know, messing around in your basement or whatever with machines before you started to feel like you had something that you could even present
I think
people?
In 92 or 93, I bought my first analog synth from Repeat, who is he was a resident with Jeff Mills at Future Shock Fridays, and so that was 92, 93 that I bought my first computer, or my first synthesizer. Then I bought my first music computer, which was an Atari 1040 ST. And then my first record came out in 96. So it was probably 3 or 4 years of messing around and you know, developing the skills until I...
Did you immediately, I mean, even when you were DJing, did you take the name Function? Was that immediate?
No, it's actually it's funny. It's funny that you asked me that, because it's kind of a funny story, and I don't know. I used to use another name, which I'm kind of embarrassed about. It was very, very early '90s rave.
You don't need to be revealing anything. You had another name. That's all we need to know.
I had another name. No, it was just very, very rave.
Speedy J, for example.
No, it was Overlord, and it was like there was a record out of I think it was one of the guys from Hard Floors. This is not your ordinary drug dealer. He is your drug overlord. But what had happened was, I was always friends with kids that wrote graffiti, but I could not write graffiti for my life, and I was always in awe of the whole tagging concept and you know, writing graffiti, but I wasn't any good at it, and I never tried to be. One of the things that we did when I basically ransacked my parents' basement and had my friends that wrote graffiti like come in and cover it was an unfinished basement with cement walls, so you know, we just had all this graffiti up, and then I set up my turntables, and it was like a rave, you know. But my one friend, Chris Santiago, his tag was Function, and he used to write Function, and there was a big Function piece on my wall in my basement.
So you stole his name?
Well, he got in a really bad car accident, and he was sitting in the back of a car, and a dump truck had run a stop sign, They were at the stop sign, and the truck didn't see the stop sign. It drove through the back of the car, and like he was hospitalized for a year and a half. He had to relearn everything. When it had first happened, we thought he was going to die. It was it's still a miracle that he lived. And when he was in the hospital, and I was really close with his sister and his whole family. He was like one of my closest friends, and I had always loved the name. And I know it's kind of wrong to like take somebody's name before they die and assume that they're gonna die, but he lived, but out of respect for him, I thought he wasn't gonna be around. And I was like, out of respect for him, I even told his sister, like, you know, like at the hospital, I was like, I'm gonna use the name Function now. And then he survived, and then, you know, a year and a half, it took him, he had to relearn how to talk, relearn how to walk, everything. And then he realized that I was using the name Function, and he kind of wanted it back. But I explained to him, and he understood. But I thought it was funny because he later on, he kind of resented it for a little while. And like he was a truck driver, and he wound up buying his own truck, and like he got so upset that he wound up calling his trucking company Function Trucking, just to like, because I wouldn't give him his name back. But he was cool with it. I had his blessing. So
it's interesting. I mean, obviously, Function clearly has techno function.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, the reason why I was so drawn to it was, one, it looked really good written down, but you know, everything, like when I started collecting gear, everything had a function button on it, you know. And I remember specifically like a TB303, like the start stop button, I think is called the function button, and I would just always look at it, and it just looked right to me written down. So yeah, so, but yeah, and also, you know, techno and electronic music is very mathematical, and you know, there's mathematical functions and stuff like that. It just all seemed to work.
Were you good at math in school?
No, not at all. But my early records were, the titles were based around function type mathematical equations and stuff like that. But no, terrible at math. Absolutely terrible.
When did you meet, when did you hook up with Regis and Female and all of them? I mean, obviously, I assume that you were listening to Downwards records at some point, and that this Birmingham techno caught your ear. Or were you even friends with them before that they had started that stuff?
No, I mean, it's just one of these situations, one of these stories where it just all fell into place, you know. It was very natural. I mean, Carl, Pete, and I, from the moment that we met, we were good friends. I was living in this apartment on 30th Street above Rogue Music, and I had extra space. So a friend of our mutual friend, the way Carl and I met was through this kid, Danny Clifton, he's the guy that was wearing the Underground Resistance jacket that Mad Mike said something to. And he used to work at a record shop called Planet X in New Jersey. And that's where, locally in New Jersey, I would do a lot of my record shopping, more so than Groove. I never really used to go into Brooklyn to go to Groove Records because of Planet X. And Planet X was owned by this guy named Spike, and then his two main employees were brothers, Larry Clifton and Danny Clifton. And Danny Clifton, his DJ name was Dan DC, and he was really young, but an excellent DJ. And they used to do sort of these outlaw parties in New Jersey, and it was like almost, like this kind of territorial thing. It was like, there was the Brooklyn crew, and then like these guys doing their thing in New Jersey, and it was a bit separate. But there was one time where Frankie Bones came out to one of their parties, and they discovered he was blown away by this 16-year-old kid that was just killing it, and wound up booking him at Storm Raves. And then Dan had a bit of success as a DJ. He wound up getting involved in politics and stuff like that. So by the time he was 22 or 23, he got out of techno. But he was a huge Downwards fan, and he's the one that put me on. Like when I'd go record shopping, he'd be like, "You need to hear these records." And like,
what was it about those records that were you immediately drawn to them?
And it wasn't really the Surgeon stuff that struck either of us. It was Regis. It was Speak to Me. It was Regis Montreal and the track Speak to Me. It was sort of the same way I feel about like Giorgio Moroder, The Chase. Just like this loop that it doesn't change that much from start to finish, but somehow that loop reinvents itself and gains more and more strength every time it loops around. Mm-hmm. And at that time, that was when that was the kind of sound that was breaking. Obviously, like Minimal Nation, Rob Hood, Minimal Nation, and stuff like that. Prior to that, a lot of dance music was very song-oriented, had changes, especially a lot of the Belgian rave stuff, which is kind of derived from new beat and industrial. It's stuff that music prior to that was similar to that, but had vocals, and then this was becoming like more instrumental, but still had very strong song structure, and
the fact that it didn't change was
appealing to you. Yeah, it was really appealing because it was good for DJing because you could use two copies of a record and like two copies of the same record and set them off like a beat or two behind and like do tricks with it and not have to worry about a change coming up, and you could just do that for a while. But and it's just like cool for layering, but it was also how sparse it was, and that it didn't need all of the trickery and technical flashiness. It wasn't flashy. It was just it was what it was, and it worked. So
was that something you were already aiming for with your own work, did you feel? Or did it not change the work that you were doing?
It did. Yeah, I mean, I think the stuff that I was doing before that, and it was a bit more house oriented, but not house. From that era, especially from Rob Hood and Jeff Mills, and then also later Downwards, but actually no, not Downwards. Like Rob Hood and Jeff Mills, they were this gray area between techno and house. Like some of the early M-Plant releases, like the first Memory Foundation on M-Plant, like 93 or 94, I forget the title of the record, but it struck me as a house record but it was very techno. And the problem I always had with house was that, like Carl always says, it's music your mom can listen to. You know, it's like it doesn't challenge the listener that much. You know, especially with the whole, you know, and it reaches house has always reached a lot further than techno because of the whole vocal thing, and it has radio appeal and stuff like that. And
did you even feel that way back then?
Yeah. I always felt like New York is a house town, and it was always hard for techno to break through, and it was always on a much smaller scale. And I liked techno because it was out there. You know, it wasn't generic sounding, and you could take a lot more chances in the techno realm. And if there were house records that I really liked, they did tend to fall into the more techno class, like acid house. Like I was really into the 303 and, you know, DJ Pierre and the whole Chicago acid house movement and stuff like that. It was house music, but it was very electronic sounding. Like house music was always a bit more organic to me, and like I said before, I like
New York house music's a lot different than
Yeah, growing up, like the house music that I was familiar with always had, you know, it wasn't out of the ordinary for there to be a flute solo on a record, or like some sort of a solo with somebody jamming. Like it was very organic, you know. Latin percussion and stuff like that. I was always, you know.
You don't have any flute solos in the past.
No, actually, Carl does that.
We'll have to
subliminal flute.
Long and deep for the Discogs entry on that one, I suppose. By the time the Limelight had sort of died down a little bit, you were promoting your own nights. Doing stuff.
No, that didn't come until much later.
Okay.
Well, Limelight had closed for a while, and it got locked up from like 95 to 97, and then I'd say about 98, in 1998. Well, actually, no. My first party was at it was a rave. It was at the New York Film Academy, and Carl played at it, and so did Pete Female, and Joey Beltram and Neil Landstrom. It was a great lineup, and it was a really successful party. That was, I think, 97. I think that was 97.
And was one of the reasons you even just wanted to put on a rave was to bring over Carl and bring over these people to New York?
I'm a really social person, and I just, because it was such a challenge, this probably isn't going to sound right, because you don't want to admit that you're basically putting on parties so that you can play. But it wasn't just about me. It was about pushing the music. And I noticed that after the whole phase of Limelight and all that stuff, techno exploded in New York in 91, 92. And then by 94, 95, so many things happened that there was like a negative stigma attached to it all. So it kind of died down. And I never wanted to be a promoter. I wanted to push the music and also, you know, have a place for myself to play. But it wasn't just about me. It was about pushing techno. And I felt like everything took such a dip. I mean, even to the point where older friends of mine would be like, "Oh, you're still playing techno? That still exists?" You know, like it almost became a bit forgotten about. And then, you know, Limelight reopened again, and they were just booking like terrible music and terrible acts. And A friend of mine, Alan Sachs, who was a big rave promoter in New York in the early mid 90s, he basically showed me the ropes. He taught me how to promote events. I had done my first event before I knew him, but in the next couple of years, him and I became really good friends, and then he got a job working at Limelight for Peter Gation and getting putting nights on, and he was more of a trance guy, and he started booking like Gate Crasher nights, and I think it was they booked like the first time Tiesto ever played in New York and stuff like that. And so he brought me in and introduced me to Peter Gation as the person that would book techno. And one of the first projects we did was to bring back Jeff Mills. And it was the first time he played for us. It was the first time he had played in New York. Or no, the first time he played Limelight in 7 years. He went for a stint of 5 years, at least 5 years, where he wouldn't come back to New York because I think he left with a bit of a bad taste in his mouth because of the way everything kind of crashed and burned, you know? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it was really special to, you know, from that Underground Resistance story to, you know, bringing him back.
How was it when he came back?
It was incredible, and he did a section of his set that it just brought you right back to the moment. He did a section of his set that was 1991 Future Shock, like what he would play. You know, like, so, you know, in hindsight, some of these records are so cheesy, like Apotheosis 04 Tuna, you know, but you know,
it was Jeff Mills playing it,
and he knew that's what he had to deliver because it was his first time, and he knew that there were people in the crowd that wanted that, and it was epic. It was incredible.
So when you booked Female and Regis and Will Landstrom, that was outside of the Limelight.
That was outside.
Was that the first time you'd met those guys in person?
Oh, actually, I didn't finish the story before. So I was working at Road Music. I was living on the 15th floor. Dan DC was a good friend of mine, and you know, he's the one that turned me on to Regis and Downwards and all that stuff. And I very quickly became a fan and owned all the records. And then Dan didn't do this with anyone else that he was a fan of, but for some reason he felt so connected to the music and knew that there was something so special about Downwards that he faxed the number on the record. He got in touch with Carl, and then very quickly started having phone conversations with Carl and they became very connected just on the phone very quickly and started speaking on a regular basis. And then what had happened was there was a guy named Mace, I forget his DJ, I think his DJ name was Mace, yeah. He was a promoter in Philadelphia. He when they came over for the first time, they didn't even play in New York. They played in Philly, but Pete Female and Carl Regis wanted to visit New York because they loved New York and they grew up on New York culture, and a lot of the music that they were listening to as kids was, you know, rooted.
Post-punk, I assume.
Yeah, post-punk, and like, it took me a long time to figure out why he was so passionate about certain things, and it may not even be the case, but I remember a few years ago I saw the movie that Soft Cell did, Non-Stop Ecstatic Dancing, I think.
The erotic cabaret?
The erotic cabaret, yeah. And I was watching it, and then it kind of clicked with me that's why Carl was so inspired by the area that I was living in New York. And it was very similar to what the Soft Cell had experienced in the video, and the landscape of that part of Midtown Manhattan really. So I think when Carl arrived, he was just like, "Oh my God, I'm here, I'm in it." Like, so what had happened was they were playing down in Philadelphia, and they wanted to stay in New York for a week, and they needed a place to stay, and I had a big place, so Dan asked me if they could stay, and we were instantly, you know, they stayed with me for like a week, and I showed them around, and it was a riot, and yeah, we've been friends ever since. So the thing I love about Carl, I don't really speak to Pete as much because Pete's in the UK, but the thing I love about Carl is that above and beyond music, I became friends with him as a fan, but we really connected, not through music, but through friendship, and instantly became friends. And I think at this point, 15 years later, I think that's one of the strengths of Sandwell District. I think people can tell that we are really good friends, you know. And you know, now that I live here and we tour, I mean, it's not even like work. It's like a laugh the whole time, you know, just being on the road with him. He's the funniest person I've ever met, and you know, I think
Sure.
it's necessary for any type of band or music group to have this like strong friendship bond that I think it strengthens the whole thing.
Where does Juan come into all of this? Juan Mendez.
I think a similar type of situation, except in LA.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Carl was always meeting people that were, you know, they were giving him music. Everyone was always trying to put a record out on Downwards, you know, and Downwards was a very exclusive thing. But you know, he started getting music. He went out to LA to play a gig, and I think he kind of got stranded. I don't know the whole story, but I think he kind of got stranded by the promoters, and John really looked after him. And then, you know, John did sidetracks back then and was giving him a lot of the music, and really liked what he was doing musically and with the label. And then the fact that John looked after him the way that he did, you know, just took him around LA and showed him all the sights and stuff like that. And so I think it's a similar type of situation. They instantly became really good friends and were always in touch. And you know, Carl would always go out there, you know, he'd go out to his girlfriend or whatever, and go on vacation and see John and stuff. So.
Mm-hmm. And I think I heard.
And I met John through
Carl.
Carl, yeah.
Okay.
But also a huge fan of sidetracks, and you know, what John was doing in LA with all those guys was like, you know, it's for the West Coast, like one of the few conglomerates that really made proper techno. Like, you know, the Kid Clayton, John Tejada, Juan Mendez kind of crew.
Sure.
So they
with obviously this is about you, this function interview, but I think at the same time Sandwell District has become in some ways a large part of who you are, and what you're about. I wonder, going back to the UR thing, when you first saw them and you were talking about how you didn't know whether it was a label, whether it was a group, whether it was what these photocopies on the wall were. I mean, is that something that sticks with you in a way?
It's funny, as I was saying it, it actually hasn't. As I was saying it, I was thinking to myself, well, yeah, that kind of is the same type of thing that Sandwell did. To be honest with you, us touring as Sandwell District, like using the name, it just kind of happened. We didn't want to bill ourselves as Regis and Function, and we didn't know how to bill ourselves. And then we're like, you know what, fuck it, just let's call it Sandwell District. But you know, I guess it does have something to do with the whole Basic Channel and Underground Resistance aesthetic. It's like a shield, you know. It's like we stand behind that, but that's first, you know. It's like,
well, for someone who doesn't,
we're not anonymous, we're
exactly
not faceless,
know, yeah.
But it is, and you know, when it comes to techno and independent music on this level, like, you know, we're not talking about huge record sales and like, you know, it's just it's and you know, what is a label? Like, you know, the question is, how did you start the label? Like, is it a label? Is it really a label? A label is, you know, Arista, or, you know, a major record label. This is just, we're selling a few thousand copies of a record. It's not like, when you say the word label, you think of like this, you know, major operation. You don't have an office, you have a building, you know, like,
But at the same time, over the past couple of years, you guys have had to have some of these. I don't know if you have talks about it, but you, in the backs of your minds, you have to have the idea that it's been getting bigger, that it's been something, and how do we negotiate where we are?
Yeah, I think housing it all under the name Sandwell District just it's worked out to just make the most sense to us. We don't refer to it as a label because it's just a place for us to we don't want to sell our stuff to other people and then have them not pay us, and there's not enough revenue in it to really split it with someone, and it's easy to do on your own. So, and it doesn't. It's not classified as a label. It's not, it just has become an act, an artist, a label, and it's just all housed under that name. And I don't know if there was a point where there was a conscious decision. It just happened. But that's, I think, the great thing about Sandwell District in general is everything has just happened. Nothing has been planned. And anytime we try to plan something, it just doesn't feel natural. We just have to, because as things are growing, we start getting people to try to give us deadlines. We don't adhere to deadlines. It's tough. Like, you just we're situationists, and we drift, and we do have to keep it that way, and we've tried to change that and just keep finding out that we just need to just.
I think situationist has to be the best way to put it, because while you talk about all of this, drift and misinformation and all of these things, you also headlined Sonar this year. It's like you have these moments where you come into the whatever the mainstream is, so to speak, and then you just sort of.
Well, I mean, we're not going to say things. We're not going to say no to it. We didn't set out to play at Sonar. Sonar asked us. So it's an honor to.
Did you approach that set in a different way than most sets?
It was a difficult one because usually we like to play longer sets, and
how long was it? An hour?
Hour and 15 minutes. I mean, it was originally supposed to be an hour and a half, but as these things go, people play over their set times. There was and it's a major production, so they're constantly moving the stage around, so the scheduling got cut a little bit short, so we lost 15 minutes. But I mean, the excitement of playing for a room indoors that has 30,000 people in one room, 90,000 people in the whole festival, it's so exciting that it's over and done with before you even get started. So I'm not dissing Sonar in any way, because it's incredible, but I expected to walk away with more. I expected it to feel like more, because I played at the Labyrinth Festival last year, and that set changed my life. And I put as much into the Sonar set, like preparing and just organizing and stuff like that, than I did with Labyrinth. And I think it had a lot to do with, like when I played at the Labyrinth Festival, I played on my own for 3 hours with a lot of gear, drum machines and stuff. So, it's two people sharing an hour and 15 minutes. It's like, it's very, I think the only reason why I walked away not feeling what I felt from Labyrinth was because it was so short. It's just like.
You bring quite a bit of gear with you to almost everything. What is your live setup usually like for a normal gig? I mean, I know Labyrinth is quite special because the organizers were able to get you things in advance. And
Actually, most sets I play with Carl, and the setup with that is very basic. It's just a DJ mixer, and each of us have a laptop and controller. We also have in our writer that if they can get us a 909, they'll get us one. So a lot of gigs are Carl and I playing DJ mixer, laptop and controller for each of us, and a 909. On special occasions like Labyrinth, I'll ask for it, and I don't require it because I know how expensive it is for promoters, especially hiring at this point, analog gear becomes more and more rare and more expensive. So I can't demand that I want an 808, a 909, an SH101, a Space Echo, 24-channel mixing desk. I can't demand that on every gig. But for special things, and when a promoter like Russ from Labyrinth is so enthusiastic about what he does and cares so much about the level of production, Russ has always, I tell him all the time, he is the only promoter I've ever worked with that has pushed my limits to the point where I want to impress him more than any other promoter I've ever played for. Because, when he first booked me for Labyrinth last year, he sent me like a 2-page email just like highlighting things that he had heard from me and what he liked and what he was going for. And as soon as I read that, I knew the type of person that I was dealing with, and I knew it was going to be special. Aside from everybody else telling me how special it was, but yeah, I mean, and then he said to me, he was like, "Do you need any gear?" And I was like, listen, I don't want to ask for too much, but could you get this? And he was like, "It doesn't matter. I'll get you whatever you want." So I was like, "Are you sure?" Because I'll send you a list of a lot of gear. He's like, "Whatever you want," and he got it all. And it was worth it because, it was an incredible setup, a lot of gear, and it worked. It all, and that was the first time I did something like that live with that much gear. And the thing is, I did it without a sound check because the stage area was kind of small, and I had to set up while Dan Bell was playing and kind of duck down and stay out of his way, so I wasn't in his way or anything. And I just did a line check on headphones, and I don't know, it all worked. And when I say worked, I don't mean like the gear worked. I mean like it worked.
Mm-hmm. And you're going back this year again?
Yeah. Same
setup?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about it a lot, and in the last year, I did a similar set at the Bunker in New York because Brian really wanted me to recreate a Labyrinth type set and setup. But I've been, with doing gigs with Carl and then also gigs on my own because a lot of times I'll just play with a laptop and controller on my own, but yeah, I'm gonna do it with all the gear, but I've found that I can also accomplish the same thing I'm looking for with just the laptop controller. So just because last year was such a special moment, I'm just gonna go with the same type of setup because it did work. So, but I don't really require that at every gig. It can become a bit complicated sometimes, because you have so much gear, so many options. It can get a bit messy. So, but that sloppiness also can work in the moment. I don't like listening back to recordings of it because if I do, if I do a podcast, I'll sit there and run through it with a fine-tooth comb over and over because I don't want to release something that people are going to listen to over. A live performance is about the moment, and the second that moment happens, they're on to the next moment. They can't hit rewind. They can't listen to it ever again. So,
This, of course, makes the RA podcast, which I guess we can talk about, all the more special in a way because you did it in 6 days or something like that.
I mean, I'm a procrastinator as it is. I mean, I did it
and
really in 2 days. I mean,
I didn't know that at the time.
I spent 4 days procrastinating it.
Yeah. Okay.
6 days total, but I spent 4 days. I was working on it, but like, I'm the kind of person that I get my best results when I back myself into a corner with very little time to spare, and then that's when I could spend.
I'll remember to back you into a corner more often when I want something from you.
Well, with the RA podcast, you did.
I called you at the beginning of the week, and you were like, next week. Oh, okay. Yeah, sure.
I think it was you called me on Tuesday morning and you asked if you could have it by Friday afternoon.
Yeah, of course. We always want that weekend buffer.
Yeah, and I was like, well, what's the difference between Friday at 5 o'clock and Sunday at 11 o'clock?
My sanity and your sanity.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's what I figured out. That's what I figured out on Sunday night when 3 people from Resident Advisor were serial calling me, asking me where the hell it was.
Well, we like to be...
No, I can't blame you.
We like to be thorough.
No, I can't blame you. I was nervous too. I was like, because at the time I didn't have an internet connection at home, and I was like trying to upload it. I went to a restaurant that wasn't getting connected to the internet. And,
All's well that ends well, I suppose.
Kind of the story of my life, actually.